Good evening and welcome to the Fortune Report. I'm so glad that you decided to join us today. I'm really excited because I have Representative Robert Johnson who is here to talk to us today about some legislation that was passed in in Mississippi this year and went into effect July 1, and just some other political things that he may want to talk about. He's having some situations going on, so he may have to leave us early. So we're going to ask him if he will to go on and start. Representative Johnson, you want to tell them your camera is not on right now. You want to tell them about yourself and what legislation before you have to leave us?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm the Democratic Caucus leader in the Mississippi House of Representatives. I represent Adams County, Franklin County, and Jefferson County. That's District 94. I'm a native of Natchez. Natchez is my hometown, and that's the area I represent. And I've been in the legislature 30 years, a little more than 30 years. I'm a lawyer by trade. I practice law out of Natchez and Jackson. And so it's a pleasure to be here and to educate the public as much as I can.
And that's our goal. And the thing about it is, what I told them when we started this process is that the main thing we want to do is to educate, because if you don't know what's going on and you are in the dark, then it doesn't help you. I was telling some friends of mine, I said, if you're in a desert and if you're dying from thirst and an oasis is 3 feet from you or 2 feet from you, if you don't know that oasis is over there, you will die. So what I want to do is provide information so that we can engage our audience to move them to action. So please tell us what was some of the legislation that was passed this past year that went in effect July 1 that some of our listening people need to know about.
Well, the major piece of legislation, the one that's most appropriate and most urgent to talk about, is that we passed a monumental tax cut bill. And Republicans talk about tax cuts like it's a great thing. You're saving money. You're doing this. But the greatest need in the state of Mississippi is for us to provide services for the people we represent and for the people of the state of Mississippi. And we are not necessarily a state that's supremely up to par in terms of the services that we provide. You consider that on infrastructure, 29% of our highways and bridges are either impassable or not up to spec. We have been turning down in healthcare. We've turned down $16 billion over the last 15 years that could have helped, that could have provided healthcare coverage, preventive coverage for over 200,000 Mississippians, working Mississippians, and it could have been able to do more about keeping our hospitals open and sustainable. And just to spend a little moment on that in healthcare, when people look at hospitals and say, oh, well, your hospital may close. When your hospital closes, you won't have a doctor either. And we are in the state of Mississippi, we have the lowest doctor-patient ratio in the country. There are fewer doctors per person than anywhere else in the country. So when people start talking about we're going to cut $2.2 billion out of the budget, we're going to make a $2.2 billion tax cut, and we're going to put money back in your pockets. Well, the average median income in the state of Mississippi is $42,000 a year. A tax cut for those people would mean about $750 a year. It costs you more than that just to put gas in your car. But when you consider that you're not taking care of your roads, or you have to drive 40 to 50 miles to get to an emergency room, that $750 won't go anywhere for you.
Exactly.
And what you need more than anything is that you need good roads, good bridges. You need sufficient health care, access to health care. You need hospitals, emergency rooms. I mean, I was coming through Hinds County. Hinds County had a hospital, Hinds General Hospital, in the southern part of the county. There's no emergency room in the southern part of the county now. So you have to drive to downtown Jackson to have access to an emergency room. That's not true for anybody who lives in Madison County. That's not true for anybody who lives in Rankin County. They're all in close proximity to some major health facility that they can take advantage of. And that should not be the case. And it doesn't have to be the case. But when you talk about cutting $2.2 billion out of a $7 billion budget, that means that something is going to go lacking. And if it doesn't go lacking, then they're going to have to make that tax cut up somewhere else. And so look in the future when these cuts kick in, and they're beginning to kick in now because they made a clerical error that they refused to correct, that instead of it taking 10 years to gradually have these tax cuts coming into effect, they're going to start coming into effect immediately. So we're going to start seeing a loss of services beginning in January or maybe sometime this fall. Couple that with the big ugly bill that they passed out of Washington. There's for Mississippi, there's probably going to be 13 to 14,000 people who are just going to be kicked off of healthcare, period, immediately. And so couple that with what we're doing here, it is just a comedy of errors. And it's all done in an effort to promote some political ideal that has nothing to do with the people you're trying to serve. When I hear people talk about, well, we want to give a tax cut, and I'm asked why. 47% of our budget, you need to understand this, 47% of the money that we provide services for people in the state of Mississippi comes from the federal government. The health department is already knows that they're going to lose $273 million in funding from the federal government. How are we going to make that up when we're cutting our budget too? So all those things are very serious. And why your show and we sitting on here talking about that is so important is because they're only able to do that because we have a supermajority in the Mississippi legislature, in the House and in the Senate. Mm-hmm. And so you need to know that these very serious and severe things that are about to happen to you, and you ask yourself, what can I do about it? You can make sure that we don't come back in 2 years with another supermajority when we can make some correction to make these things work the way they should work. To continue about what this tax cut will do, our teachers are still the lowest paid in the Southeast. We still spend less per student in public schools than anywhere in the Southeast. And so when you consider that, what are we cutting? What are we cutting things for? There are school districts in this state who don't have central air and heating. There are children who go to school every day who don't, when they go home, they don't have access to the internet. So they have to drive, they have to have somebody drive them back up to just stay out, to hang outside the school so they can do their homework on their computers because they don't have that at home. There are so many things that we have to play catch up with in the state of Mississippi, and everything that you play catch up with costs money. And now we getting ready to give up $2.2 billion of that, like we're a rich state, and we're not. And so, go ahead.
Could you tell our listening audience a little bit more about how they removed taxes for income tax, but they have increased the gas tax? Is going to affect everybody because we don't have a mass public transit system here, so people have got to drive. And all of this is going into effect July 1.
That's right. There's going to be I think there's going to be about a 13 to 14% increase in your gas, which means essentially boils down to about an extra 12 or 13 cents on every gallon of gas. But you make a very good observation. We don't have mass transit in this state, not to speak of. Jackson has a bus system, but beyond that, that's it. And you consider that people in rural areas trying to get back and forth to work, many of whom are not getting paid a living wage, and you're going to make it even more difficult for them to even have a job because they may not be able to afford the gasoline to go back and forth. And consider that they say, well, we raised the gas tax because we want to make sure we need to improve our roads. And they're exactly right. We do need to improve our roads. But when you cut $2.2 billion out of your budget, that money that you were supposed to be enhancing transportation with is going to be eaten up by those cuts that you just took away from transportation. They won't have the money that they had before. So you're going to increase the amount of money people pay for gas, and you're still not going to be able to provide them with adequate roads and bridges to go back and forth to work on. And consider that our transportation system in this state, our transportation department, 50% of their funding comes from the federal government, and they're going to cut that. So you're going to have a cut on the state level, a cut on the federal level, and you're going to have an increase in your gas tax.
You've already said that the hospitals are closed in a lot of these areas, which means that people will have to travel in order to get to, if they need to go to the hospital. And so now that's an additional burden for them to get there because it's going to cost them more to get there. But now the when you all passed the lottery bill, it was anticipated that some of that money was going to go for highways and to the highway department and for bridges and roads. Having some of that money gone there?
It has. It's been going at a rate of $100 million a year. They anticipated the lottery would draw in about 80, but it's been up above $100 million. What 80 million is supposed to go to highways, and the excess would then go back to education. When Representative when the bill was passed, when the initial push was started 20 years ago, the idea was the lottery money was supposed to go to education. Well, they turned around. You know, I don't know what the disinterest in public education is in the state, but it makes no sense when 80 to 90% of our students are in public schools. It makes no sense. That money should have gone to education. It would have done a lot more for education than it would have done for transportation. It takes $1 million just to do overlay on a mile of road. So if you get $80 million to the Department of Transportation, they can only fix 80 miles of road with $80 million. So it really, but you put $80 million in the Department of Education, you could take care of a lot of kids. So what they did this year when they raised the gas tax, they took that lottery money and diverted it. It's supposed to now go to the public employees retirement system. And so, and that's the other, brings me to another point. We passed a bill to change the way we do retirement in the state. We have lost 80,000 more people than we gained in the last 10 years. People are leaving the state. Young people not here, not only not because of their jobs, but we don't provide any cultural enrichment for them. And you do all that with money too. And we could do it. We really could. But there's this affinity for this idea of conservatism, and conservatism is fine, but it doesn't mean you choke yourself to death to do it. And that's what we're doing in our state. And so in the retirement system is another issue. People ask, well, it's not doing as well as it had been doing. What are we going to do about it? Well, if you let go of over 2,000 state employees that were paying into the retirement system, then your retirement system is going to suffer because you got more people paying in than you have, taking out than you have paying in. And people say, well, maybe they were just trying to be efficient and cut jobs where the state wouldn't have to spend as much money. That's a fallacy. That's a fiction. Those 2,000 employees just didn't disappear. What happened is those jobs and those services that they were providing, most of those employees are now working for some private entity that was somebody's friend. You take child support, for instance. The child support was working fine. The state was providing child support. Now it is done by a private company. Those people who work for that private company, they didn't bring in 400 or 500 new employees. They just took the state employees and put them in their system. The difference is now those state employees don't have the health insurance that they had with the state, and they're not paying into the retirement system. So this idea is a shell game with Republicans when they say, well, we're gonna cut jobs. We're gonna make the state more efficient. No, they don't. They put that money into a private entity that they do not do the job as well as the state was doing it, and not as efficiently, because they're trying to make a profit. The state was just trying to provide a service. And so the retirement system is another issue. They're $25 billion. I won't say in the hole, but they need a $25 billion push. We can't give them a $25 billion push, but we could start gradually. If we hadn't cut $2.2 billion out of the budget, the proposal last year before we passed this tax cut was to put $150 million a year, which we could do. We could have done into the retirement system to make sure it stays viable. Now we can't do any of that. And so,
well, I heard you speak also earlier about the supermajority in the House, the supermajority in the Senate. And now from your other part of your job, can you talk to them about gerrymandering and how that has impacted where we have these supermajorities in the House and in the Senate and now in the Supreme Court here in Mississippi?
Yeah, well, every 10 years we do redistricting. And this last 10 years, this last census that we did, the Republicans were in control of the House. And they essentially drew a map. Now, 38 to 39% of the state is African American.
Right.
And I would argue that it's probably the population number is probably closer to between 40 and 45% when you look at it, because we just have not counted as many people as I know that we have. And so But somehow we only make up 25% of the state legislature. And so that is all because you draw these squiggly district lines to accommodate and polarize districts. You got black districts that have 80% African American population and white districts that are 85 to 90% white population. And you got, and to some extent, some of our own people are complicit in that because, people want an easy way to get elected. So, oh yeah, I like that district. I said, well, you don't need 75% black district to get elected. Do your job. You can get elected with 60. You can get elected with. My first time I ran ran against an incumbent, and I was nobody knew who I was. I ran in a 57% black Senate district and won. And we got people now that are in those kind of districts. You can win. And if we would stick by our guns and not agree, and we're not complicit in the drawing of these lines where you have these all black districts and you have these all white districts, we need middle road functional district where you got a mix of a population. Not only does that help you elect a more representative government, but it makes government work more efficiently. You got more people involved. You got the interests of people involved instead of everything being so polarized. But we go and do that every year, and we have to stick by our guns and in the future and make sure that our people understand that it's more important, not so much that you have an easy road to get reelected. It's more important that you have more people like you or like me, or not necessarily black, but people who have the same affinity in terms of what they want to see happen here in the state and who they want to help. I need more Democrats. I need more people who care about providing public safety, public education, public health, and public infrastructure. I need people who care about that more than they care about whether or not they're going to come back in the next 4 years. And so if we did that, we wouldn't have a supermajority.
Exactly. And the thing that I was talking to our audience about the last time is that we've got to own our responsibility in some of these things that occur. And I just heard you say that, which is a reiteration of what I had said. Like you said, you got somebody who is so vested in wanting to have a supermajority for them to get elected that they're not looking at the bigger picture to whereas we can have more people elected. But now, one of the things that I talked to our audience briefly about the last time, and I would like for you to try to help them understand a little bit better, is when I told them, even though the way that the lines have been drawn give us these supermajority Republican Senate and House, but for these statewide positions such as governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, these are one person, one vote. And so we've got to own the fact that we're not voting at the level that we should in order to get these, because even if we did have these, these supermajority, please talk to them a little bit about if they were to go out and vote, how we could change the trajectory for the state.
That's a great point. I talk, one of the populations that is a little bit frustrating who don't vote are young people, and they are of the attitude they're great people and they care, but they don't see any value that elected officials deliver. And so and it's our responsibility, my responsibility, to make sure that they understand how acutely the government affects what they do. And so we have to start talking to people less about big picture items like we got to have a good public education system, got to have good health care. We have to start talking to them where they are. How much money do you make? Well, I make about $50,000 a year. Do you know that if you had a different leadership in this state, that you'd be able to make more money than you're making now? And you have to explain to them how that could happen. Well, you could talk about more opportunities and more economic development in your areas, more competition, instead of, the thing that conservatism and the thing that these tax cuts do, they maintain a status quo. They maintain a separation of wealth. And so when I can talk to people about how I can make their lives better, and I got to be able to talk about it in a very acute and pointed way, not in a big picture way. For instance, I was talking to a young man who's a school teacher. He said, I know, but how much difference does it make? I said, how much money do you have in student loans? I got about $50,000 to $60,000 in student loans. Well, you know how much of a difference it made for people to go and elect Joe Biden as president, because there's nobody on the Republican side wants to forgive those student loans. So what would it mean to you if you didn't have to pay that $50,000 back and you could just concentrate on being a good teacher, and building a home and taking care of your family. Well, it would make a big difference. Well, stay at home the next time. And if that's what that was a year ago, if that's what you did, then you got a person now that just eliminated all that student loan forgiveness. That makes a difference. That makes a difference.
It definitely did. Not only did they eliminate it, but there's also, they're talking about garnishing wages or something like that in order to repay that. And so, I mean, that's what I told them the last time, is that we've got to be able to connect the dots, right? I want them to understand the day-to-day thing. And I don't know, I want to try to ask you some questions before you have to leave. I know situations going on and you may have to leave. And so the last 15 minutes of our show is dedicated to Ask Dr. Mel, but you brought up a point that someone asked me that I'm going to bring up right now in case you have to leave us a little early, which is, how can we get the message to young people? You started talking about meeting them where they are, helping to relate to them as they are. And someone told me, what you're doing is good, but my concern is, will young people hear this podcast? Will young people know what's going on? So how do you think we can help to get the message out to young people?
Well, I'm trying to work with young people, because I am not great. Everybody tells me the way to reach them is social media, and social media, to a certain extent, it has to be a little bit entertaining. You got to talk about, look, my kids are all adults, but they listen to podcasts. They're listening to young people who are. I know that they listen because these people are talking about issues, national issues. They're talking about sports. They're talking about entertainment. And so they're good at listening, but you got to have, there are only certain people they're going to listen to. And so it may not be me. It may be you or me, somebody having a show, but we have guests on that these people relate to, that they want to hear. And they could be saying the same thing that I'm saying, but it's who's saying it. Okay. And those people understand. A lot of young people I talk to now are afraid that they may not ever be able to buy a home. When I just watched the election in New York for the New York mayor, and all the Democrats upset. He's a socialist Democrat. But one of the things he got young people interested in is he talks about home ownership, and he talks about housing and how to make it more affordable for people who live in. They have different issues in New York, but housing and home ownership is a big issue here too. And young people are really anxious about whether or not, it's not about so much if I can own a home, but how can I afford to live in a way that I feel comfortable? And so how can you help me what can you do to make sure that works? My daughter worked in DC. They had, what do they call it? Where you can rent. Even if you're a young professional, your rent can be based on your salary, and you can get a nice. Okay. I think kind
of like a sliding fee scale.
Yeah, it's something like that. But we need something like that here. We need more of that here, and that's young people want to know about things like that, or whatever it is that they care about. They care about entertainment. They care about being able to move back and forth safely within the city without somebody committing a crime against them, but without being harassed. They want to know that you care about that. They want to know that their law enforcement is better trained socially and culturally. They know who they're talking to, how to talk to people, how to deal with people who may be in a situation where arrest is not appropriate, but some kind of discussion or some calling some health professional. They care about those things that nobody talks about. We talk about crime. Well, we got to cut crime down. Well, a lot of people are concerned more about, what are you doing with people who have mental illness? What are you doing about people who are not really criminal, but they can't really take care of themselves? They don't need to be locked up. People care about things like that. And so it's our job to make sure that we put our ear to the ground and understand what people care about. And I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of talking about big picture items without talking about what it is that really affects people's day-to-day, their lives. What do they care about?
And I know that we need to move them from complacency and apathy to action and participation. But they need to feel a part of the solution in order for them to want to invest in that and to move forward.
Yeah.
My goal here on this report, when I started this, and this is just the second time, it is to educate them, to connect the dots, because so often we hear, well, my vote doesn't matter who's in office, it doesn't matter, it's not going to change anything, but yet it does. And I know that and I was trying to express with some of these appointees to the judicial system, they have, from being an attorney, they have lifetime appointments.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
when you putting these people on the appellate courts, when you put them on the federal benches, much longer than the president who put them there, they have lifetime appointments. And I mean, just in case they happen to have to be in front of one of them, you want somebody who believes in the rule of law. You want somebody who values the Constitution, and somebody who is going to treat you fairly regardless of your race, gender, creed, or sexual orientation. And so I want them to understand the connection between when they choose not to vote because they think their votes don't matter, and move them to action because they can change the trajectory. If you look at the last election, it appeared that Kamala had a lot of enthusiasm, but what a lot of people did not account for were the young white male voters, and they made a difference in the election for Donald Trump. And we had not, accounted for them, right?
Well, yeah, right. I mean, but the other thing, Democrats and the former President Obama talked about this yesterday. We got to toughen up. We can't be afraid to speak out and speak our minds. Republicans do it so to the extent that they literally lie. They would just, whatever they think that will get people excited, they just make it up. I mean, Donald Trump pretty much started that, but all of them do it now. They do it on the state level. They'll just say anything. I mean, the governor walks around saying Mississippi's doing greater than it ever has. No, it isn't. Our gross domestic product is lower than the national average. It is lower than any state in our region. We have the highest rate of poverty. We have the lowest per capita income per person. How is that doing good? Our economy is growing at a slower rate than we're creating jobs. No, you're not. You're doing it at a slower rate than anybody, but they say it like it's supposed to be great. And you got people, if you read the comments on social media, oh, thank you, Governor, you're doing a good job. No, he's not. He's not. We're not doing a good job. But what we don't do is what I'm doing now. No, we are not paying people enough money. Our economy is not growing enough. There is nothing for people to do here. We don't have enough theater. We don't have enough music. We don't have enough social and cultural things that young people can get involved in. And we're in the capital city. Think about what it might be, what it's like in Natchez or Greenville or places like that. And there was a time, you're not as old as I am, but there was a time when all those things existed in those small towns. Yeah. People stayed there because there were jobs, there were things to do. We had, it sounds kind of superficial, but people want to be somewhere where there are nice nightclubs and nice night restaurants. They want to be able to have a place to relax and enjoy. And when their friends come to town, they got somewhere to take them. They don't want to walk around with nothing to do but sit at home and watch TV. We need to develop, a culture and an environment that people want to live in. And so you talked about the Supreme Court, but let me mention something. We were talking about student loans, but think about the number of young women who don't have control of their bodies now because the Supreme Court made a ruling. And they could only make that ruling because people didn't vote and somebody got elected that got a chance to appoint those Supreme Court justices.
Well, but now it's the Dodd decision, so that it originated from Mississippi.
Yeah, I know it's embarrassing, but yeah.
I know. I told him, I said, now Mississippi has been known for a few things. We've been known for Elvis Presley, B.B. King, some musical icons, and we're known for the Dodd decision.
Yeah.
That just doesn't. But speaking of which, now let's transition to talk a little bit about healthcare. You talked about hospitals closing. We've seen more and more hospital close in Mississippi. We already have the worst health outcome of any state. I can't tell you how many times I have written Senator Roger Wicker about his votes and how they are negatively impacting the state of Mississippi. And when we look at our healthcare system in this state, it's hard to tell somebody to retire to come to Mississippi because that retirement might cause them to die because they can't get to a hospital if they need care. as I said, we have the worst health outcome. When you look at the things that we have, heart disease, diabetes, all of that, we lead, we're, if not at the lead,
We
we're
are the
in.
worst. We have the worst outcome from heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, infant mortality. We have the worst outcomes for that.
But we put less money in healthcare than any other
Absolutely.
state as well.
That's right. That's right.
And so how can we get our elected officials to understand the importance of putting monies there in healthcare? When you're talking about the health department now is set to lose as much money from the federal government as they're going, or they probably will lose. I was before I moved to academia, I was a director for breast and cervical cancer. We saved women lives in this state. We got women screened. We detected breast cancer at an early stage. And if they were detected, we got them put on Medicaid for their treatment. I understand that they are basically taking a lot of money from that program. So what will uninsured people do in this state when they need health care?
They're not going to be able to do anything. I mean, you just, I gave a town hall about a week ago, and somebody said, I told them it's a bleak outlook. The state already is grossly insufficient in terms of the money they put into healthcare. And now the federal government is cutting it even more. And so, well, what can we do? I said, you better eat well and exercise. Because I said, I know it sounds like I'm being funny, but I'm being serious. You're going to have to take care of yourself. You got to learn how to find what vegetables to eat, how to take better care of yourself, because you won't have access to the kind of health care you need. I mean, my father's 88 years old. My mother's 83. They have to drive to Jackson. They have to drive 100 miles to see the doctors that they need to see. That doesn't make any sense. I didn't grow up that way. You didn't. We didn't have that to deal with, and we shouldn't, and we don't have to. If anybody cared enough to make sure that we were doing the job that we're supposed to do to take care of people here in this state. But again, when you talk to young people, you talk about those kind of issues, and you want them to care about it, and that's how they let them know that could change. If we were having elections this year and you really want to make a difference in those areas, all you have to do is go to the polls and elect somebody else, and everything would change.
Well, and you bring up a valid point. In 2026, one of our senators, Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, is up for re-election.
Right.
That is a race that if we get a good candidate, that, and if we get people out to vote, that even though they think that, this is, it's a hard hill to climb, I don't see it as a hard hill to climb.
It is not a hard hill to climb. Look, she is the most statewide. I think she's the most gettable candidate, and she needs to be got. She has done a terrible job. She doesn't care about people, and she hasn't done anything for the state of Mississippi. They had a tornado down in Tylertown, which is right in her backyard, literally. She's from Brookhaven. She supported a president and continued to support a president that took 2 months to send any relief down here to those people in Tylertown. Now, at some point, I don't care. I could have voted for him, but I would have been dog cussing him all the way back to the White House. Don't treat my people like that. I don't care if you got this, you want to get rid of FEMA, you get rid of FEMA some other time. But this is a perfect example why we need those federal programs, and you're not doing your job. When Joe Biden was president and they had that tornado in Issaquah County, they had money down here to take Reed in 3 days, in less than 3 days, in 2 days. The governor met him in Rolling Fork, and the president met him with a check. We had the money we needed to start recovering. And so Cindy Hyde-Smith was gettable. And we got a young man who's a seasoned district attorney out of Lowndes County, Scott Cologne, who has pretty much announced that he's going to take her on. He was a person that was nominated by Joe Biden to be a U.S. magistrate, and Cindy Hyde-Smith blocked his appointment, his lifetime appointment, the whole time Joe Biden was president. She was the only person that blocked it. Every other legislator in this state said, was the senators have to say so. Roger Wicker said, fine, I support it. Cindy Hyde-Smith, you need both. And she would block it every time. He needs to beat her, and he can beat her if we get out behind him. He's a young African-American Democrat who has been a prosecutor, who has fought crime, who has taken care of people, who went to school out of state, came back home to make a difference. And so we will have a good candidate, and we need to get excited and get behind him, because that vote in the Senate will make all the difference in the world in terms of what we get down here, how people are taken care of. I tell people all the time, we have 4 representatives and 2 senators, and we got over $28 billion in the last few years just in ARPA money, let alone the COVID money. And the only person that voted for that relief was Representative Benny Thompson, the lone Democrat in the House of Representatives. He needs help. We need to send somebody else up there.
And you bring up a valid point, which is if we get out and vote. Okay, so you talked about African Americans. You think it's a little bit more than that, but the data suggests that they make up about 38% of the population.
Yeah.
We know that about half of them are registered voters. So we're down now to 19%. We also know that less than half of them vote on a regular basis. So now we're down to about 9%.
Yeah.
The question is, how can we move that needle? Whereas if we can just increase it, if we can get half of the registered voters to vote, then we can make a difference. But the question is, how can we get them to vote?
Well, look, they did it in Georgia. They had the same problem in Georgia. Stacey Abrams got together with a campaign. There's a formula out there, and we're going to do it. And the Democratic Party and some of us are working on that formula and working on getting it done. But let me go back to you. You're right about all those numbers, except I do believe it's more than that. But those divisions that you did are exactly right. And to encourage people, that what people need to understand is that they have the same problem. Black people are not the only people not voting. So if you think about if we are more motivated and we get more people out, even at our 40%, if we do it at a higher rate than they do it, then we can win. But because everything you say, white people vote at the same, I mean, everybody thinks that it's just black people are not voting. White people are not voting. It's just more of them than they are of us. And so we have to enhance our numbers by making sure that we get our people registered and get them out to vote. But you're right. The first step is to register people to vote. The next step is to get these people motivated to actually go vote. And I think we can get that done.
Well, let me say this, because I'm going to be somewhat critical, and maybe you can help me in this aspect, is the fact that one of the things that I told the audience last week, and one of the reasons why I think it's important to have this podcast, is that the state Democratic Party, in my opinion, has done a poor job in educating people about what is going on and their need to be involved. When I asked, it was an informal poll, but I asked some friends of mine just informally, have you gotten anything from the state Democratic Party? Every one of them said no. The only time, now I do receive stuff on the regular basis from the National Democratic Party. And then also when a candidate runs in our state, oftentimes they will send us stuff. But at the state level, if the state Democratic Party was just sending out like the national do, where they send out something all along, and then they ask you, of course, for some money, but at least they're educating you in the process. What can you all do better from the state Democratic Party to educate voters so that it doesn't appear that you just come to them to tell them to go vote? Because some of them don't know, because that's another question, and I'll take this. I don't know when you may have to leave, but that is another question that's been asked about how often they have to vote and those kind of things. But my question is, what can the state Democratic Party do in order to educate people so they'll know why they need to participate, why they need to vote?
Well, I don't know what they can do, but I don't. They're developing a message. But let me say this about the state Democratic Party. The state Democratic Party has had fractured leadership. They've had the last 10 or 15 years, they just have not been as organized. I think we're on the right path now. We have new leadership. This part of what happens at the state Democratic Party is I mean, I keep talking about money, but it's hard to run a party when you don't have people paying dues or putting money into the party. I give money on and I'm not part of I'm part of the Democratic Party. I'm not part of the state Democratic Party leadership. I don't make decisions. They have the 50-member board. So what can the Democratic Party, I've told the state Democratic Party, they need to have a bylaws convention and reorganize the party. They're never going to be able to function efficiently with 50 board members, 50 executive board members. You can't hardly run an organization with 50 members, but they're talking about running a state party with trying to make a decision. When you have a quorum, you got to get 25 people from across the state as a quorum. So they need to reduce that number at least in half, and preferably a third. You need a few people who are serious about leadership on your board making decisions, and it will make everything move faster. And the National Democratic Party recognizes that. And so with this new leadership, the National Democratic Party, for the first time in a very long time, is putting money into the State Democratic Party. So that information network that you talk about, I think at least by this time next year, you're going to be seeing more and more of that, even before that, coming out of the Democratic Party, reaching out to people. But they haven't done it partly because there's been so much fluctuation in the leadership, but the other part is they haven't had the resources to do it, and they're beginning to get the resources to do it.
Well, and I hear you, and I understand that, and I appreciate what you're saying. But I also would like to offer, since I don't have leverage with them, is that if they take a page out of the National Democratic Party's book, if they send out just some information, and then at the end of it, ask them, will you pitch in? They, the National Democratic Party always ask, will you chip in? Will you chip in $3? Will you chip in $5? Will you chip in $10? All of that money starts to amass, and so you will have.
But Dr. Fortune, that kind of system, that kind of networking, that kind of information gathering and sending out those, that takes, there's the Democratic Party has one staff person. Now, there was a time when I first got elected, the Democratic Party had 8 or 9 people working for them in their office. That's no longer the case. But they're trying to get back to that. Everything you talk about, the party leadership understands just what you just said. All of that has to happen, but they got to have the resources and they got to have the personnel. If they don't have people volunteering, they don't right now, but they're working on getting volunteers and getting if they can't hire people, they're beginning to contract with people to get that message out. But I hear you, and I relay that information. And you're not the only person that has made that observation, and you're 100% right about it. In fact, you've made that observation and suggested it to me before, and I passed that information on. And I can tell you that the wheels are beginning to turn.
And I want them to, and because this is a climate right now, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, where people are beginning to feel hopeless, like there's nothing that they can do. But I want folk to know that there is something that they can do, and we can move people to action, because we need to move from hopelessness to hopeful, and so that people know that there is a rainbow at the end of the rain.
Well, Dr. Fortune, let me say this. Everything you said, everything you described, and everything you suggested needs to be done. But I'm gonna flip the honors back on our listening audience. I want people out there to pay attention to what's happening at the legislature. I want people to pay attention to what's happening in the governor's office. When I say pay attention, follow. You can watch every legislative session on YouTube, and you don't have to watch it live while it's going on. You can come home and watch it later on that night. And I say that's important because an educated populace can have an effect. They can move. I operate like everybody's watching me. People ask, why are you always so fired up? Why are you always on the floor pushing on these issues? And I'm not the only one. All my desk mates, there are people in my car. We got a handful of people that continue to push issues and continue to push back or push for things that they know will help. But there are people who are doing nothing, and literally are betraying the people who voted for them, and then going home and lying about what they're doing or fabricating a reason why they did it like it's important. But the reason they can do that is because the people that we're trying to get to vote are not paying attention to what's happening in their state government. And it should, and they need to do that. And if they did that, they feel the same way you and I feel, and they would be motivated to get out and vote. Because let me tell you, one great motivator, people would be really, really pissed off if they knew how people were selling them out down at the state legislature. You wouldn't make people go out and vote. And so what I would encourage people to do is get on the YouTube channel or get on your internet and watch the legislature and be motivated by some of the ridiculous things that go on down there, and be motivated by the people who are down there fighting for you and standing up for the issues that they know you care about. And so when the public gets involved, it makes a difference. I tell people all the time, a man can't stab you in the back if you're looking them in the face. And so you don't know what's going on if you got your back turned to what's happening in the legislature. But when you're looking at them and you're watching the show and you're watching the work when you're watching the sausage being made, you can make a difference, and you will be motivated to make a difference. So I would encourage people to watch your government work and then have something to say about it.
Well, and they need to. I mean, those are some valid points, and like I said, the main reason for me even wanting to do this podcast was to educate first and foremost, because I'm an educator, and then to get us engaged and to be able to reach folk that we have not been reaching. And I want people to understand that, you know, this is not a spectator sport. You got to get involved in this thing, even to the point if you're making calls, if you're knocking on doors. Now I don't know about knocking on doors nowadays, because with everything going on, that's a little scary. And I'm just gonna say I wouldn't advocate for anybody to go knocking on doors, even you politicians personally.
Well, we got to do it. But you make a good point. But you can do it, but you got to do it. You can't do it alone. You got to have it. Let's do it in a group. Don't knock on the door if you're by yourself. Yeah.
But right now there's so much. People are hearing and seeing so much going on. Yeah. I'm going to at some point talk about the immigration policy and how that's impacting so many people in this country. And as quiet as it's kept, President Obama, there were over 3 million immigrants that were sent back out of the country. Obama. But it was not the harshness of the process, but based upon the rule of law.
It was a fair process. People got due process. They got sent back because when they got to court, they had a fair hearing and they couldn't make the case. What they're doing now is, if you speak Spanish, if you have a tattoo, they don't care if you got a citizen. They don't care if you have a work visa. They just pick you up and lock you up. And those kind of things. And people say, well, I was born here. It won't make a difference. If they can justify denying due process to those people, they'll figure out a way to justify denying due process to you as well. I don't care if you're a third, fourth, fifth generation person here. If they don't want you here, if they're trying to take you out, they'll figure out a way to justify robbing you of your constitutional rights. And they
laughed about it, saying that maybe some of the people who were born here might need to leave if they're committing crimes. So you're not off the target by saying that at all.
Right. Look, I'm gonna have to go in about 2 to 3 minutes.
Well, and we're almost to the end of the show. So if you need to leave, you can, because the only thing I'm going to do now is just address a few things with the audience. But I do appreciate you being able to come on today and to spend some time and providing some valuable information to people.
Well, I enjoy talking. As you can tell. I'm a litigator by training. But I enjoy talking to you. I mean, I think, we need to do more of this, and I'm glad that you have an audience who cares about what's happening. And I'd be glad to do this anytime, because I think communication and education is very important.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being here. And I'll wrap it up with the audience.
All right. Thank you, doctor. You all have a great day. All right.
You too.
Okay.
I'm so glad that Representative Johnson was able to join us today. I spoke briefly on hope and hopelessness. And so when we talk about that, because a lot of folk are feeling hopeless and they're saying, well, what can I do? I'm seeing all of this. I'm hearing all of this. I'm reading all of this. And they don't feel empowered to be able to do anything. But I want you to know, okay, so I looked up the definition. I wanted to give you the actual definition of hopeless, which is defined as the feeling or state of despair, lack of hope. And then hope, on the other hand, is defined as a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. So I want us to move from a hopelessness to hope and hopefulness. And we can do that by owning our responsibility, accepting the fact that maybe we did not go vote, but we're not going to stand in judgment of that. But we're going to talk about, what do you do now? What you can do now, and that information will be provided for you. There is a man who is right now his name has been put forward for the federal appeal judge, and his name is Emil Bovee. And let me tell you a little bit about him. So that the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to take a vote on tomorrow whether or not to send him forward for the Senate to confirm. We will provide the phone numbers for our senators for Mississippi. As we said, Senator Roger Wicker and Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith. If you're listening to me in other states, you have two state senators as well. Every state has two state senators. And they have your Congress people depend on your state. As Representative Johnson just said, Mississippi has lost a lot of people. So we used to have 5 Congress people. Now we have 4 because we've lost population. So if you are you'll have to know in your state, but it is the Senate that confirms these nominations. And so every state has 2 senators. If you don't know who your senator is, if you're listening from another state and you're not familiar with your senator, you can send a message to me and I will make sure that you know who your senator is and how you can contact them. But let me tell you a little bit about Bovee, he is Mr. Trump's personal attorney. And you had over 900 Department of Justice attorneys who urged the Senate not to confirm him. Because this is the thing that I was trying to tell you before. These are lifetime appointments. And I understand that the numbers for both our senators, the phone numbers, their contact information have been placed in the comment section. But these are lifetime appointments. So well after a president has left office, these people have a lifetime appointment. This is why your vote and your engagement are so important, because when you don't vote, when you are not engaged and you allow others to determine who is going to go forth to represent, as you can hear from Representative Johnson and some of the things that I've told you for the brief couple of times we've been together, they don't always do the things that are beneficial to you. And they don't act in your accordance to you. Let me tell you about Bovee, because I wouldn't ask you to contact your senators without providing you with the information that you need in order to know why, because this is what's important. He worked with the Attorney General to reshape the Department of Justice to be a tool for targeting perceived political opponents as opposed to an independent, apolitical agency. In the past, we have said that the Attorney General's office, Department of Justice, was apolitical. They've often said that Lady Justice was blind. I mean, we know that the statute is blindfolded because it's not supposed to be based upon race, gender, creed, or color, but based upon the law, the Constitution. When you've had somebody who wanted to subvert the rule of law, who wanted to subvert the Constitution, that person should not have a lifetime appointment, because that means that regardless of who's in office, that person is still there. And so let me tell you a couple of other things about Bovee. When the lower courts, when they were with the immigration policies, and the lower courts were said that the planes didn't need to leave with immigrants on there without them having gone through due process, Bovee said that to ignore that, and that was to ignore the Constitution. How can you have somebody on at a federal appellate court that does not believe in the Constitution? And so also, he politicized the pardoning of Mayor Eric Johnson. And another thing that he did, he issued 2 memos that describe the legal prosecution of January 2, that's the insurrectionist, January 6th, as a grave national injustice. This is not somebody, in my opinion, who needs a lifetime appointment. The information for the senators that represent Mississippi, they've been placed in the chat. You need to call them. One other thing, and this is what happens because y'all know I can talk. Okay, so another question that I had is that the question was that some people said that they don't participate because they don't know why we have so many elections. This is what you need to understand. We have 2 state senators. A state senator's term is every 6 years. As I said before, Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith election is next year. We've already had the one that was last year for Senator Wicker. So those are every 6 years. Your Congress people elections are every 2 years. And the reason for that being is that they are supposed to be closer to the people. So in every 2 years, you are electing them. Your governor's race is every 4 years. The senators in the state of Mississippi, I think their terms are every 4 years, and the representatives are every 4 years. So it's not that there are so many races, there are just different races taking place at different times. My time is winding up. I've gotten a message that I'm winding down. But we will continue our dialogue because we want you to be educated to know what is going on so that you'll know how you need to vote and not who to vote for. Because let me say this before my time is over. I believe in the 2-party system. I believe that I don't have a problem with that. But I think you need to understand who people are and whether or not they support what you need. You heard the representative talk about Mississippi, the laws that were passed. He's encouraged you to stay on and watch them and follow them during the legislative session so you'll know what things are being done and what things are not being done for your benefit. It's 6:30. I don't know. My time is up for this session. I appreciate your time and I appreciate everything. And if you have any questions, and we'll get into more education at another time when we don't have a guest, but we learned a lot today. Some things that we already knew that were re-emphasized, but we learned a lot. And that is our goal, to educate and to engage. Thank you. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. And look forward to this. Oh, and I need to make this public service announcement before I go. Please follow the Women for Progress. Go to your Facebook, YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. Go to Facebook, click videos, do the likes. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.